So as you're at the part of the process where you're trying to uncover opportunities for leverage, there's important requirements for how to do that well. So one would be if you could have some sort of larger representation of your map, whether you were able to actually get a large printout of it, like 4 feet by 6 feet, or you can draw it up on big flip chart pages, big enough so that people, a team, let's say, of people can actually walk around and look at that map and interact with it. The reason you do that is it's key to helping you find opportunities for leverage. So what we coach teams to do is we give them a few questions and ask them to identify where on the map they see these things happening. So if the first is, where are there parts of your map that are frozen? In other words, parts of the map where change is not likely to be happening anytime soon. So the group that I'm working with that's working on the peace processes and transforming peace building and the peace building system basically is looking at things like inflexible funding structures. Probably not going to change that overnight. Would be great if we could, but probably not changing. We can look at funding streams in education. Maybe a great thing to change, but we can't wave a wand and quadruple the amount of funding that's going to education. That's basically telling you where not to look for leverage. So if it's frozen, probably not a leveraged opportunity. The next one is, where are there potential pent-up energy for change in the system? Where things you can say, there's energy here, people want change, people are working for change, but there's something blocking it and keeping that energy from actually being expressed and working for change. And you want to take a Post-it note with a particular color that represents where is there energy for change, and use those Post-it notes to mark parts of your system where people see this potential energy that people could tap into. A second one is, where are there bright spots? So a bright spot is a jargon for what in the social science world is known as positive deviance. And what that means is examples where people are doing something that bucks the trend, that doesn't fit the pattern. So there might be school systems, let's say, that are in a failing community or community where the schools are not doing well. And there might be a school that actually is doing well. That's the bright spot. That's the positive deviant, the one that's actually sticking out and working against the trend. Bright spots can be really important opportunities for leverage. We'll talk more about that. The other one is to look for parts of your system where we call it a mixed bag. So it might be a loop or a dynamic which sometimes feeds a vicious cycle or negative outcomes, but sometimes feeds positive cycles. One that tends to appear a lot in maps is the role of media. So media sometimes promotes stereotypes which increase violence or cause people to be critical and pull back from and not fund schools or other programs. But sometimes media actually can be educational and actually lead people to constructive action or motivate them for change. That's what we call a mixed bag. So sometimes that media coverage sometimes has a negative impact on the system and sometimes has a positive impact on the system. Very useful to note those moments. The last indicator for a potential opportunity for leverage is, where do you see the potential for lots of ripple effects? So certain parts of your system, certain factors or certain dynamics in your system are highly interconnected with the rest of the system. Whether you've been able to draw that on your map or it's shown up in your research. You want to look for those places where, if we could be successful in moving a part of the system, changing a dynamic, it would have lots of secondary and tertiary impacts on other parts of the system. That's what we call ripple effects. So you want to spot those places where, if you could make some change, it would have lots of effects in other parts of the system. As your team starts to mark your map up and the way that we tend to do it is using different color Post-it notes to mark these different indicators of potential leverage. You'll see that these Post-its start to cluster around certain parts of the map. And where, for example, there might be a bright spot, there might be energy for change, there might be high potential for ripple effects, or there might be a mixed bag. And the places where you get more possible indicators should be very informative to your team. And so you say, well, what's going on in that part of the map? What are the opportunities for leverage there? What did we each see? Why did we post it? Why do we mark that part of the map as we did? And as you have that conversation with your team and people start to express different ideas for what the opportunities are, you can start to synthesize and begin to sort of pull out what are the potential opportunities for leverage in each of these areas where we've got a kind of a clustering of indicators for leverage. The part of this process that is probably the most helpful is to have multiple people doing it. There's a real danger in kind of the expert bias coming through here. So basically, I know that I'm really good at a particular activity. I'm really good at early childhood education. And so the tendency, the human tendency here is that if I see a map with lots of diverse pieces in it, and early childhood education is in there, I might gravitate to that. And I'm gonna say, oh, that's the opportunity for leverage. I could be right. I mean, it could be that in fact is true. I could also be sort of seeing what I want to see and sort of forcing my view of what I hope to be on what really is. The best protection against that is have this be a participatory collective process so that someone can say to me, I might have tagged that part of the area as being frozen. In other words, a place where we shouldn't look for an opportunity for leverage, but you tagged it as a bright spot. Let's have a conversation about that. And so we actually have to work that through. To what degree is it really an opportunity for leverage? And to what degree maybe I'm seeing what I want to see? So one of the more interesting processes that I've worked on where we were looking for possible opportunities for leverage was part of a process within the U.S. government where we had what's called the interagency process, which dealt with the actors in that process were people from the Department of Defense, people from the State Department, and people from the U.S. Agency for International Development, the people that did development work. They were part of a systems mapping process in a particular country, and we built the map of this country, the key dynamics in this country, and we presented that to them. They had big maps of the system maps in front of them, and they were working as separate teams. So we had a defense team, a state team, and a USAID development team. We said, how would your agency engage with the system? Where would you go to try to find leverage? And what was really fascinating about this is that in the first sort of 20 minutes or so, each of the tables went to a different part of the map. But they went to the part of the map you would predict they would go to. So the defense people looked for the part of the map that had to do with security and demobilization of armed forces, because that's what they do. The State Department people went to the part about government relations and the impact of government actors, because that's what they do. They interact with governments and leaders. And the development people went to how development funding was being utilized and the equity of development funds. And they initially thought, well, that's what's going to be leverage, because that's what we do, right? We'll find leverage because that's our preferred theory of action in the world. What was interesting is as they began to explore that and say, really, what will that do? And they looked at it in the context of the system, they kind of lost enthusiasm for their initial locations. And then they started looking more generally at the map. And what was fascinating was that by the end of 40 minutes, each of the three groups independently had basically gone to the same part of the map as a potential opportunity for leverage. And it was a part of the map where, in our terms, there was a mixed bag. There was a set of dynamics that were having a positive impact and a set of dynamics that were having a negative impact. And they basically realized that if they could flip these negative loops into positive ones, they were going to create this really sort of reinforcing engine for change. So it's basically they were going to take two positive feedback loops and two negative feedback loops and change that into four positive. And they all came up with ways that they could take what they do to help flip that around. And that was the way that they hope to find leverage in the system.